Hey friends, my name is Brandon Goodyear. I'm a DP based out of Columbus, Ohio, and today I want to do a quick breakdown of a story that I shot last year. It's actually how this mug came to life. It was one of the best stories that I got to tell, and I think that the simple approach to shooting it will be really helpful for anyone who's overwhelmed at the possibilities of what it takes to make a really incredible story. Grab yourself a cup of coffee and let's dive into it.
The industry is shrinking. Factories that used to be vibrant and employing a lot of people are gone. In this town at one time, I think probably 50, 60, 100 years ago, there used to be 30 or 40 little potteries, some bigger than others. As of today, I am the last surviving pottery. People have to realize that to support American workers, it takes people buying American products.
This project was a perfect fit for me as a filmmaker, because finding a company like Godspeed that puts an extreme emphasis on the stories that they're telling and the people involved in all of their processes for the products that they're offering in their store. Geographically, it worked out perfectly. Being based in Ohio, I was able to cover this story super easily, but beyond that, I feel like the better fit for it was the story-based nature of the work that I like to put out on the internet. Okay, to get it out of the way up front, let's talk about the equipment that I used for this. I like to keep things as absolutely simple as possible. So I shot the whole thing on my Panasonic S1H with the Canon 35mm 1.4. That's it. I used a Tiffin Black Pro Mist 1/8 strength to give things that little bit of a dreamy haze, but also being an overcast day, it just kind of gave the whole film this look and feel of a town that was rising up out of the ashes. For audio support, I brought in my Sound Devices Mix Pre 6.2. For wireless, I used the Rode Wireless Go 2s, and I paired that with my Sanken Cos 11D for grabbing all of the interview audio that was used in this video. My whole approach with going into a situation like this is knowing that I have to capture as much audio and story as I possibly can. So to start the whole shoot off, I just needed to get a preliminary idea of how the whole factory works. So when I got there, I met with Clyde, the owner, and who also was the person in all of the voiceovers and kind of like talking through the process. And I just said, hey, give me a tour of the factory. And it was in that moment, because I know that, for the most part, I can be paying attention to what he's telling me, but I can also be kind of grabbing some establishing shots of the interior of the factory, knowing that later I'm going to need variety in that area to be able to move this story along, especially in a shorter form video like this one being in the 30 to 45 second range. And while I don't like to overshoot too terribly much, because then you're just going to be spending time going through footage and it's chaos. If you shoot intentionally, one of the things that having all of those extra puzzle pieces allows you is the opportunity to kind of A/B test things. So instead of being locked into the one shot that you have, establishing the scene, the location, that sort of thing, you give yourself a few options. So starting out, shooting the outside of the building, that for me was like, I got there a couple minutes early, was trying to get a call in so that I could meet up with him. And, while I was walking around before I made contact with him, I knew that I was going to need to get some shots outside the building anyways. So instead of wasting valuable time with him having to put my stuff down and go back outside, I just got those shots real quick. While he was walking me around, giving me a little bit of a tour, I was kind of getting some of those quick shots. But then after the tour, I went back through and made sure that I captured everything in that area in a very quick way, 5 to 10 seconds per clip, knowing that down the road, if I needed that variety of showing off kind of the empty factory area, really getting to the vibe and grit of the space, I had all of those there as an opportunity. Because this is a very like human-centered story, I also wanted to try and get as many of the factory workers as possible into this little piece. So the other thing that's kind of cool about the way this whole piece came together is a lot of what he's talking about in this film is the history of the town, which, if you're not familiar with East Liverpool, Ohio, used to be the pottery capital. Everything was made there. Starting out with the look. My goal with this, especially going into a, rugged factory environment, a little bit dark, a little bit dingy, my goal with this was to create the most authentic representation of the space that we were in. And as a part of that, I ended up using a 1/8 black Promus filter for the whole shoot. Now, there were a couple shots that it definitely made things a little bit too faded with the way that the backlights were coming in, but I think overall, this look worked absolutely perfectly for the whole shoot, kind of giving that little bit of a soft bloom to the highlights and, just kind of like smoothing out skin tones just enough in a way that I thought was really pleasing. And especially being in a space like this where, the speed of which I was trying to get through everything, I didn't exactly have time to like set up lights and really kind of like produce every single shot, which especially for this type of a shoot, I don't even know if it's something that I would have wanted to do, because lighting a space like that would have just ultimately created this more like high commercial look, which I feel like really would have detached from the authenticity and the feel of the space that we were in. So after capturing all of the footage for the video, one of the things that I knew I had to do was make sure that I captured really, really solid interview audio. And for this, I used my trusty sound devices MixPre 6.2, and for simplicity, I used the Rode Wireless Go's and my Senken COS 11D. For this setup, this kind of leans into one of the things that I learned from this shoot is, for simplicity, I just wanted to sit down and capture this interview without having to think too much about it. So the way that I approached it was literally just clipping that lav mic on. Didn't matter where the cable went. I wasn't honestly even like shooting a crazy ton of video during this interview, which I'll get into in the what I learned section a little bit more on this. I kind of wish I had and put a little bit more into it. But because of that, my goal was just to capture the cleanest audio I could. So getting that lav mic outside, not having to worry about clothing rustle. And that went into the wireless goes, which went into my sound devices. So I had a really solid 32-bit audio file that I could work with in post, knowing that being in a very noisy factory and literally, there was nowhere we could go. We were in a back office, but it was still loud as all get out. So I wanted to have the best file that I could work with to be able to edit it and clean it up in post, which for that, I used what I use pretty much on every single project, which is Isotope RX Advanced. It's a crazy expensive plugin, but I'll be honest, it's paid for itself so many times over, and the ability for me to go into more environments knowing that I have the confidence to clean up that audio in post, while it's not going to be perfect a lot of the times, it is definitely a lot better than most people in most situations. I think one of the things that I learned from this whole shoot, and something I would apply going into future shoots, is having a little bit more of a plan ahead of time, because while I was supposed to be there, I think for about an hour, I ended up staying maybe like 2.5 hours-ish. And part of that for me is I was really, really drawn into the story of Clyde and the factory and the history of the town and all of these other things. So outside of making this video, there were a whole bunch of other things that I just was curious about. And that's one of the things that I really have a hard time trying to convey in videos or talking with people is there's something to be said for having a genuine curiosity for the people that you're filming. And that's something that you literally cannot teach is, the passion and the desire to actually care about the people you're filming. Now, a lot of people will say that they have that, but I'll be honest, you can really tell, and it comes across in the videos that they're creating. If you don't care about what someone's story is, I'm sorry, there's no amount of fancy editing tricks you can do that will solve that feeling in the video. Ahead of time, I was given a handful of questions to kind of get the conversation flowing in the right direction to hit a lot of the talking points that we wanted to use in this piece. Considering that it was only 30 seconds, we had to be very efficient with the words we were using. And ultimately, in the final piece, as you heard, we pretty much stripped away, I would say, 95% of, what even I cut down to be that full minute-long talking piece. Also adding into this, a big thing that I learned, and I pretty much do regardless of the shoot now, is I always set up a camera on a tripod if I'm doing any sort of interviews, because for me, one of the things that I absolutely miss when I don't have it is the ability to cut back to that talking head angle, which I think it's like one of the most underrated things in filmmaking in general. One of the things that I notice auditing a lot of the YouTubers that I watch is 60 to 75% of their videos were this talking head A-roll angle. And while, we all love the B-roll and the stories and the cool shots and the landscapes and all those other things, one of the big aspects that goes into telling a story, especially on a platform like YouTube or even in a commercial setting, is that talking head interview. And one of the things we want to do as filmmakers is make that look as good as humanly possible, but also knowing that we're capturing for what inevitably will be used as a voiceover. But having the ability to cut back to that talking head and not have it look like, a pile of hot garbage, that's going to be hugely valuable when you're creating your piece, because you know that you have that as a safety. And, if whether you didn't capture enough B-roll or something goes disastrously wrong, you know that you have that to cover some mistakes. Or conversely, in the other direction, if you need to edit a flub in a talking point, you can cover that with B-roll. So, kind of working back and forth with those things instead of being locked into just B-roll or just A-roll. So I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned from this video specifically was focusing on being able to capture those interviews up front and then being able to utilize B-roll on the back end to be able to tell the story in a more efficient, more intentional way. Now, if you go to my website at all, you'll see one of the big things that I am a huge advocate for is intentionality in storytelling. One of the biggest things that I took away from this shoot that I really want to be able to bring into more of my future shoots is diving into setting up interviews as one of the first things that I do when I arrive on set. Now, one of the big reasons for this is I feel like as a storyteller, and as I've started making these YouTube videos, one of the things that makes the process of putting together a video significantly easier is having all of the puzzle pieces to intentionally build the story you're trying to tell. And in a video like this, where I spent the majority of my time shooting all of the B-roll and kind of capturing the process of things, and then coming back to the interview and trying to reverse engineer all of the B-roll that I shot and trying to get it and fit into the story we were trying to tell, it felt like there was a lot of extra work that had to go into making all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. Now, not to say that it didn't fit together, but I think that if I shot the A-roll and I knew aspects of subjects he was going to hit on or details that he was going to specifically talk about, that we, granted we might not necessarily use them in the final piece, but if I had those pieces of knowledge in my head going into shooting all the B-roll, I would have been able to be a little bit more intentional with the things I shot. And instead of just kind of shooting all over the place and capturing whatever was available, I would have been able to get those specific details, making it a lot easier to illustrate the story that I was going for. Okay, with this being my first breakdown of a video that I shot, I've realized that there's a lot of things and details that go into the films that I like to make. And sometimes it's really hard for me to articulate them, especially in a like cohesive, linear way that doesn't just feel like I'm kind of rambling on and on. But one of the things that I really want to address here, as I've watched through this a few times now, is something that we all know as filmmakers in the back of our head, but we very rarely apply it, is the concept of wide, medium, close up, medium, wide. Getting coverage of your scenes in a way that gives you variety, but also options to be able to create and tell your story, but also like giving it a kind of a roller coaster of emotion rather than just constantly fixating, hyper focused on close up details. You know, as cool as it is to shoot something like 85-1-4, super close up, everything's out of focus except for that sliver of a razor thin depth of field. It doesn't tell a story. When you're really trying to like tell a story and show those details, you have to be able to like have an intentional frame. And, you know, if you're trying to show, like, for example, if I'm trying to show this mug, I can't shoot this at 1.4 and expect to show off all of the intricate details of the pattern on the mug, the handle, you know, all those really cool details of it if I'm shooting super shallow like that. And so getting a shot that's 90% of that, or, you know, 80% of that, but it moves the story forward, is going to be a better fit for your film overall, rather than trying to, you know, spend an extra 30 minutes to get that shot perfect. And especially in a situation like this where there was a limited amount of time, it was a, hour and a half, 2 hour drive to get out to the location. So, you know, I'm already spending the majority of my day to get this done. I, want to be able to tell the most compelling story. Also, another thing that is really, really fascinating to me as a storyteller, and one of the things that's allowed me to get a lot more efficient with the filmmaking that I do, is what I call getting people into like a flow or a groove, especially approaching something like this where I'm working with factory workers in a small town. Like, this isn't something that they're having done on an everyday basis. So for me, being able to just kind of go in, be as like low footprint as possible, and just kind of like asking them questions, making them feel important. They're doing this really incredible job. And if I can just allow them to kind of forget about the fact they're on camera for, 5 minutes or something, then ultimately I can get them in their environment doing their thing way more naturally. And it's going to lead to this level of authenticity that I think is missing from a lot of films today, where, there's so much direction and, oh, you got to do it this way. And okay, let's do that over again. Like, there's something to be said for doing something over and over and over again and still having it feel authentic. That is why you hire a professional actor. But for a normal everyday person, once you start doing things 3 or 4 times over, you get that really like robotic kind of like, I'm just performing, trying to get this perfect, and this director's not happy with it. And it makes things go a lot smoother when you can just get someone to be in their mode of operation and, just do their thing. And I guarantee that, as long as you've got all your technical stuff in your back pocket and you're not futzing around with all your controls, you've got everything exposed properly, in focus, ready to go, that first shot's probably going to be your best take, because there's the least amount of pressure and people aren't really concerned with all of the other workings going on. So I talked about this a little bit in my Panasonic S1H video, if you want to check that out up here. But one of the things for me that's super important is the natural sound that I'm capturing on top of my camera. Now, as someone who went from the Rode VideoMic Pro to the VideoMic NTG, I've gone through all of the, on-camera mics that work with DSLR and mirrorless cameras. For me, the biggest upgrade that I made back in 2020 was getting the XLR module for my S1H and moving over to XLR-based microphones, primarily of which being their signal-to-noise ratio and the ability to really capture clean, high resolution, which I define as anything 24-bit, 48K or higher, audio in camera, which really allows, those natural sounds to just blend into the video in a way that feels way more natural. And I think adding in those sounds in a very, very subtle way, which it makes it really hard because I naturally love to talk with the people I'm filming. But as a result, I have to be more intentional that if I see someone doing an action, I have to just shut up and watch, view, see it with my eyes, capture it on camera, let that scene play out so that I can get all of those like really cool, natural, crispy sounds and then go back to talking and engaging with the people. Because being able to bring in those natural sounds instead of having to do Foley or something after the fact is going to allow people to feel like they're connected to that scene in a way that, like, you have to have a really, really good Foley artist to really match everything up perfectly. But when you can just capture that really, really good sound on camera, and especially for me shooting at 35 millimeter, which is pretty wide, so I'm pretty close, you get that really nice feeling as if you're in the scene with someone. You're like looking through a window rather than just watching a film or something online. So for me, and something that I did in this video, which especially being in a factory like this, there's a lot of really cool, pressure release valves. They're, using a air blaster. They're, dumping clay. They're, sanding and scraping things. Like there's a lot of really unique, funky sounds and textures that are able to be utilized in this film to really feel like you're in that factory rather than just kind of like observing it from a third person view. So the last thing I want to touch on is the decision to shoot this whole thing handheld. And as as someone who's been shooting handheld for the past 3 years as a filmmaker, it's something that is crucially important to me in being able to move nimbly as a filmmaker to tell better stories. If I have to spend time setting up a rig or a gimbal or a tripod or any of those other things, it's just going to slow me down on set and really take me out of the moment of capturing and telling the story of the person that has graciously, given me their time to come in, put a pause on their day, and tell their story. So I want to respect that as much as possible, and going handheld for me allows me to capture that story in a way that is true to my style, but also allows me to move a lot quicker. This is something that I think, more filmmakers in general could be incorporating into the work that they're doing, and being able to take this philosophy of moving as quickly as possible rather than spending so much extra time trying to create the next, masterpiece Hollywood film. We have to understand the split between what we're shooting as independent filmmakers versus what we're shooting with a bigger crew, being a lot more intentional, taking time on set. So when you're telling a story, you want to be, in my opinion, as nimble as possible, but also getting the best image you can. I have a theory on this, and my working title for a series I want to do is called Buy the Red Camera Last. We will talk more about that later because I've got some thoughts. All that to say, I was extremely excited at the opportunity to put together this film for the team over at Godspeed, and I absolutely love it when I find a company like them that is so passionate about telling stories, and especially in the niche they are doing, which is making the concept behind everything American made a little bit less intimidating. Because I think we can all agree that when we have inspiring stories like that, it really makes us want to get out, go, do the work, do something. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video today. It was something a little bit different. It honestly probably was not as short as I said it was going to be in the beginning, but I say that to just give myself a little bit of freedom and not have to worry too much about it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. YouTube somewhere around here has a suggestion for another video that you might like of mine, and I will see you guys in the next video.